White folks, you don't like it, but all you are is faded blacks. That's the way it is. Every one of you, if you trace your DNA back far enough, you're going to find that some of your DNA came from Africa. Because we all have the same ancestor back there, every single one of us. And those of you who think you don't have are obviously from outer space. Now, that means that every one of us is a 30th to 50th cousin to every other person in this room.
Hello everyone, welcome once again to AfriPost. I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time. Have you ever wondered why the system across the world is developed in such a way that racism has been supported by many governments that have existed, especially those in Western world? For example, if you look at the American government, you will see that the criminal justice system is set up in such a way that it discriminates against a black person. Look at even the employment and different wealth ownership strategies. You will find out that black people are disenfranchised in one way or the other. This is the same also in European part of the world. How did this come about? Because it is quite intriguing that a system would be so developed such that a whole race of human beings is being targeted, regardless of any other ability that you have. As long as you have a dark skin, that was a problem that the system was created to identify and hate. Race is something that was created out of nowhere. White elites found out that the number of rich people were being very few, yet poor people among their community were many. So they decided to invent a method of including white poor people in their groups. And that is how they created the system that has been there to date. And in fact, they even went ahead to recruit some pseudoscientists, people like Carl Linnaeus and Johann Blumenbach. They developed systems to classify humans into different races, often ranking them in a hierarchy where Europeans were to be the top. This was underpinned by the pseudoscientific belief in biological determination, suggesting that physical traits were linked to intellectual, moral, or behavioral characteristics. That is all how this race was being created and how it was underpinned. In today's video, we are going to dismantle this theory. And we are listening to one educator who has dedicated her life to talking about this issue in a very, very forthright manner. Here is Jane Elliott talking about the question of race and why all races that have existed began from black race as we know it.
Jane, you want to comment?
You want me to comment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Sure do.
You don't really want me to comment because I'm really angry. I want you folks to do something. I want every white person, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the white race to stand. Right now. Right now. Every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the white race. Now, remain standing. Now, remain standing. Now, will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the black race please stand? Up, 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 up. And remain standing. Now, the brown race. Anybody who considers himself or herself a member of the brown race. Now, the yellow race. Now, the red race. Now, look around you, people. Practically everybody is standing. Now, will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the human race please sit down? Now, people, you are all members of the same race, the human race, which started with black women between 300,000. Don't interrupt me, I don't have much time. Now, white folks, you don't like it, but all you are is faded blacks. That's the way it is. Every one of you, if you trace your DNA back far enough, you're going to find that some of your DNA came from Africa. Because we all have the same ancestor back there, every single one of us. And those of you who think you don't have are obviously from outer space. Now, that means that every one of us is a 30th to 50th cousin to every other person in this room. So I want you to turn to the person on your left or your right or behind or in front of you, stick out your hand and say, "Hi, cousin."
Hi, cousin.
Now, will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a biracial person stand? Don't you stand. Don't you stand. People, we have to get rid of the language of racism. Words are important, people. Words matter. You have to be careful how you use them, and you have to refuse to tolerate these ugly words being used in your presence. Now, make no mistake about this. I've been described as a teacher. I'm not a teacher. Teachers dispense facts and figures so that they can get their kids ready for the end of school testing. I've been called a trainer. You train dogs and horses and members of the military. I don't train people. I'm an educator. The word educator, I don't want to be interrupted anymore. People, the word educator comes from the root duck deuce, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. Now, in this country, we spend a lot of money on what we call education. It isn't education, it's indoctrination. It takes us 13 years to teach a student, to educate a student, to be ignorant about race and to support ideas that make this a better country. This is a word for this in my vernacular, since I was raised on a farm, is bullshit. Don't write that down. People, I recognize it when I see it, and that's what we're living with right now. If we were in post-racial society, Donosaurus T. Rump would not be in the White House. He got elected because white people resented having a black man in the White House for 8 years. It's time to face the truth and say the truth, and it's time for women, and all people of color to stop playing defense and defending what they are and go on the offense. We were here first. We don't have to apologize for what we are or for what we do. Now, I know some of you are thinking, boy, is she a bitch? Yes, I am. Now, how many of you women have been called the B word? Look around, fellas. Everybody's heard it. Come up with a new word. Now, how many of you are called that by a male? All right, people, for me, the B word is an acronym for being in total control, honey. And when women are seen in control, the men around them call them the B word. You need to say, "You're right, darling, I am." And then you need to whip out your little Lorena Bobbitt fruit knife. Now, don't do that, because some of these boys are scared to death. Now some of you are thinking, she doesn't like men. Oh, God, do I like men. Oh, Find me one, please, please. Some of my best friends are men. I was married to one for 59 years. When I married him, he looked just like Marlon Brando. He really did. When he died, he looked like Telly Savalas. Lived with me for 59 years. Now, what's your next question? Sorry.
Okay.
Education should be fun.
I'm already cutting out questions. Okay. Let's talk about privilege.
Angela, you want to talk about privilege?
And this goes to you, Jane, first. How did you first become aware? This is a reflective question. How did you first become aware of your own privilege? And how did you first become aware that others had more privilege than you? And I'm going to ask the same of you also.
Oh,
so,
you want me to go
yes,
first?
so you go first.
I never thought of it as white privilege. I just thought if you do the right thing, people will do the right thing where you're concerned. And because I'm white, they did. And they were wrong. Because I've been doing the wrong thing for about 33 years, I did the wrong thing. I thought I was all right. And then I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. And I watched a brilliant little blue-eyed white girl turn into a frightened, intimidated, unable to learn child in the space of 15 minutes because I accused her of not being smart enough because she had the wrong color eyes. And I watched 4 dyslexic brown-eyed boys read words they had never been able to read and spell words they had never been able to spell because nobody had ever told them that they could learn to read or spell. But on the day they had brown eyes, it was obvious that the world was theirs. They could do anything. I found out about expectations that day, and I realized that what we have done, what we white folks have done in this country, ever since we got here, is treat people positively or negatively, not on the basis of the color of their skin, but on the basis of our ignorance about skin color, where it comes from and what it causes. This is not about skin color, this is about ignorance. And the answer to ignorance is education. It is not indoctrination, it is not schooling, it is not training, it is education. But you have to have teachers who know better if they're going to teach better. And teachers can only teach what they know. And unfortunately for all of us, we've all been led down the same ugly path of thinking that it's all right to claim privilege when what we should be claiming is ignorance. We've got the wrong word here, people. This problem is white ignorance. And white people are running the show. Now you're going to think she's a traitor to her race. I'm not a traitor to the human race, and that's the only race I see. Make no mistake about that. And as long as we keep on acting as though there are several races, we can have panels like this at which we discuss white privilege instead of discussing white ignorance and deciding to do something about it. We need to start really furnishing education in these schools instead of furnishing indoctrination. Did that answer your question?
Yes, partially.
All right.
The rest of the question is, so how did you become aware of your own privilege or of others having more privilege than you? You're talking about...
I watched my students.
It was watching the students.
And I realized, watching them, that they were exhibiting the behaviors that they were copying from me. They acted hey, my little brown-eyed students, the day they were on the top in that exercise, became me. And it made me sick to my stomach, and it does to this day. I hate to remember that day, because I watched my brown-eyed children we just loved one another in my classroom. We really did. And on that day, I found out that I don't want to be tolerated. Because in that classroom, my kids tolerated me because I'm blue-eyed. The first thing that was said after I told the kids that blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people, a little brown-eyed child in the front row, Debbie Hughes, looked up at me and said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" I got a real experience that day, and a real educational experience, people. I found out how I look to people of color. And I have spent the last 50 years trying not to look like that and trying to encourage others to stop it. Tell you another thing. Do I have a few more minutes here? My father, at the age of 60, watched the film that the CBC made in my classroom the second year I did the exercise. They sent me a copy of it, and I showed it to my father and my mother. My father was 60 years old, the most honest man, the most moral man I've ever known. I showed him that film. When it was over, he stood up, and in his bib overalls and his blue chambray shirt rolled up to the elbows, he reached in his back pocket, took out his red handkerchief, and with tears in his eyes, he blew his nose and said, "I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old." You can criticize what I do until the cows come home. And psychologists do until they get smart. I don't listen anymore because my father said, "I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old." If somebody had taught my father that when he was 9 years old, we would never have had to listen to some of the ridiculous racist remarks that he made. And he never made them again after he watched that film. Don't tell me that you can't change people. Don't tell me that you're too old to change. There isn't a person in this room who is too old to change. White folks, you gotta change. Because within 30 years, you will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. And you had better pray to whoever you pray to or for, that people of color are not going to get even with us and treat us the way we have treated them. If you can't think of any other reason for treating people like equal human beings, think of that one. Because what you do today is creating the future. I don't think you want the kind of future that you have provided for people in the present. I may be mistaken. You may not know what's going on. You know what's going on. And if I asked you, if every white person in this room who wants to be treated the way we have treated people of color in this country, if you'd like to be treated that way, all you white folks, if you want that for the rest of your life, please stand. Did you understand the directions? If you're white and you think blacks have got it so good in this country and you want to be treated the way they have been for the rest of your life, just stand up. You know why you aren't standing. You know it's ugly, and you know it's happening, and you know you don't want it to happen to you. So I want to know why you're so willing to allow it for others in this post-racial society. Another question?
Okay, so we're talking about privilege and how you first became aware that others had more privilege than you, and how you might have been aware that you had more privilege than others.
Okay, first of all, I think it is important to emphasize the notion of privilege, but privilege, as Jane pointed out, can't explain the workings of racism altogether.
That's right.
Okay, so make that distinction. That's really important.
Well, do you want me to tell you when I first
Yes,
became
do that.
aware of racism?
Yes, yes.
I had I don't know whether I would say good fortune or bad fortune, of growing up in the most segregated city in the United States of America during the 1940s and the 1950s, Birmingham, Alabama. And so I can't really tell you when I became aware of racism. I think that as I learned to think and learned to conceptualize, racism was always in the forefront. I can tell you that I remember when I was about 2 years old, I was washing my shoelaces, my white shoelaces, because I was going to wear them to Sunday school the next day. It was a Saturday evening. And then suddenly, I heard this sound, this thunderous sound. As it turned out, the house across the street was being bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. Because I lived in an area of Birmingham that was right on the edge of the zone that had been created for black people. So we were able to live on one side of the street, white people on the other side of the street. When black people bought a house on the other side of the street, it was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. But let me say something parenthetically here, because you might ask, well, how is it that black people were able to buy a house in the white neighborhood? Because of course white people would have to sell it to them. It was because white people bought the house. White people who were involved in the anti-racist movement bought the house so that black people could challenge the racial zoning laws. This was in Birmingham, Alabama. You might You might have heard of Ann Braden from Louisville, Kentucky, who was one of my mentors. I met her when I was very, very young. And she and her husband, Carl, ended up doing the same thing in Louisville. They bought a house for a black couple. Carl ended up going to the federal penitentiary as a result because he was charged with some incredible charge. But the point that I want to make is that, when I learned how to think, I learned how to think about racism. And I was very fortunate to be raised by a mother who was a teacher. My father was a teacher as well. And I would like to say an educator
yes.
in the way you described
yes.
what it means to be an educator. Because as I've said many times, from the moment when I became aware of the fact that black people were treated as inferior, I can remember hearing my mother's voice say, "This is not the way things are supposed to be. This is not the way the world is supposed to be organized. And one day they will be different." So as a result, I learned how to imagine a different world early on, when I was, 3, 4, 5 years old. And I have, it wasn't so much a personal awareness, and I think that oftentimes we tend to only think about racism in personal terms. That there's, something wrong with this white person because this white person has racist ideas. But it's about ideology. It's about how larger forces are doing the work through our emotion and our consciousness, and the fact that during that period, so many white people, not all, but the vast majority of white people were convinced that black people were inferior. It had something to do with the way in which we conceptualize freedom. I mean, how did white people know that they were free? During slavery, this was supposed to be the first great democracy in the world. How did people who experienced that democracy know that they were free? Because they looked at slaves and they were able to say, "I am free because I am not a slave. I am free because I am not black. I am free because I am not in prison." So I think that it's really important to ask ourselves how these larger forces, how the state, how racist ideology works through individuals. And oftentimes people assume that it's their ideas. It's not their ideas. They have been infected before they even, oftentimes before they even acquire the ability to think, they think in a racist way. And that has to do with larger forces. I've always been interested in how these forces connect. So when we speak about racism, it's not just anti-black racism. It's racism that affects, all of the communities, Latinx communities, indigenous communities, Asian American communities, Muslim communities. But it's also about the relationship between racism and class exploitation. And it's about the relationship between racism and misogyny, and racism and transphobia. So the term that we often use now, intersectional, which means to try to think these things together and ask, how they reinforce each other and how they create modes of oppression that are especially violent and dangerous. Perhaps the people in this country who are the community that is most subject to violence, both state violence, institutional violence, and also individual violence, would probably be trans women of color.
Right.
And so I think, oftentimes when we're in institutions such as universities, we're taught to isolate and analyze. And we forget that when we engage in these processes of isolating a concept for the purpose of understanding it, we forget that this is not the way the real world works. We assume that what's in our head constitutes social reality. But social reality is very messy. It's not the kinds of, as someone who has been a teacher at the university level for many, many years, 20 years or so training PhD candidates, I can tell you that the hardest thing to teach is the difference between the tools that we use to try to learn how to understand the world and the way the world exists in its craziness and messiness. The social world always exceeds our ability to fully comprehend it. And I think that if we don't recognize that, we will never move in the direction of revolutionary change, which is what we need in this country right now and in this world.
I'd like to ask the audience a question. May I?
Oh, let me follow up with her, and then I'll come back to you. I'm doing this on behalf of the students who organized this event because the word privilege is something they specifically want you to address. You said you'd made a distinction between racism and privilege. How does privilege fit in to what you're talking about?
Well, I think white privilege is an important concept. And in a sense, it comes from W.E.B. Du Bois and his notion of the wages of whiteness. The wages, the metaphorical wages that you are paid simply because you are white. Or someone like Cheryl Harris, who writes about whiteness as property. Whiteness is as a kind of valuable property. Or Peggy McIntosh, who of course writes about privilege as being a kind of invisible knapsack that white people carry that has all kinds of codes and ways of maneuvering in the world that give them a great deal more privilege than others. But privilege is also something that one can discover in communities of color.
Yes.
I think about what's his name in the White House now? I tried really hard to forget his name. But I was watching one of his, I don't know why I was watching one of his speeches. I really don't. But what struck me was that there is always a black person sitting right behind him. Have you noticed that? There's always a black person, and that black person holds up a sign saying "Blacks for Donald Trump" or something ridiculous like that. The point that I want to make is that black people are also implicated in the way racism works.
Yes.
Particularly when one considers that now more than ever before, there are black people at the in the corporate world. I mean, the thing I didn't speak about was capitalism. And the origins of racism within capitalism, and the way capitalism has always been racial capitalism. When we speak about capitalism, we should say racial capitalism. And therefore, white workers who are clearly exploited and oppressed by the capitalist system should recognize that until we purge our planet of racism, there will be no way to move beyond this exploitative way of providing the things that people need, all over the world. And I'll say, why is it that production happens, economic production happens, not because we as human beings, and we are all one, as Jane pointed out, have needs, and we need to eat, and we need clothing, and we need chairs, and all of these things. But it happens in order to provide profit for a relatively small number of people in the world. The wealthiest 8 men, because they're all men, on the planet own more than half of the entire world. And that is obscene. That is absolutely obscene. And that has a great deal to do with racism. It has a great deal to do with misogyny and all of the other modes of oppression. And it's certainly about privilege. That's the ultimate privilege, I would say. And I'll be quiet. I'm going to stop preaching. Right.
Hear you. They came to hear you. You wanted to say something.
Today, I asked a young woman how long she thinks this has been going on, this racism against blacks. How long do you think it's been going on? Forever? You're wrong. 500 years.
Yeah.
During the Spanish Inquisition, the people who were running the Spanish Inquisition and killing people because of their religion found out that they killed a whole lot of people who had the right religion. They couldn't tell what their religion is by looking at them. So they decided they had to find another way to identify the people that they were going to kill and enslave, and/or enslave. So they set upon skin color. People, it's only 500 years old. Now think of that. It's only 500 years old. Nobody was born a racist. There is no gene for bigotry. You were not born a racist. You have to be taught to be a racist, and you have to be carefully taught. And if you haven't seen that musical, in which the last song is, you have to be taught to be afraid of people whose skin is a different shade, of people whose eyes are differently made. You have to be carefully taught.
South Pacific.
Yes, South Pacific. You have to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You have to be carefully taught. And that's what we have to do in this country to keep this racism alive. If we want racism to stop, we have to stop teaching racism. In our homes, in our churches, people, Jesus did not look like the little Pillsbury Doughboy. And God is not an old white man with a long gray beard that looks like Charlton Heston playing Moses. And Mary did not have pale skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Get over it. And do it now. You can make a difference if you choose to, you young people. How many of you have parents, mothers, who are really tired of sending Christmas cards? I'll tell you how to solve that problem. Go down to the store, buy a box of Christmas cards with the Holy Family picture on it. Take it home, color them right. When your mother sends those out this year, she'll never get another Christmas card from most of those people. People, we have to absolutely refuse to tolerate the intolerable. Elie Wiesel said, you must not tolerate the intolerable. And if it's intolerable for you, my cousins, then by the gods of war, it's intolerable for me, and I will not tolerate it. This has gone on long enough. This has gone on long enough. And we have gone along to get along long enough. We need to put a stop to it. And you can. Educators can. Educators can change this. If I can, you can. Get busy. But first,
this is a question that fits right with what you're saying. How can we talk about race and privilege with openness and inclusiveness in a way that prevents people from shutting down?
People can shut down or not, that's up to them.
Okay.
Let me tell you something. I am not responsible for how you respond to me. You got it? I flat out don't care. If you learn something in here this evening from this woman who has forgotten more than I'll ever know about racism, and what little I know, if you decide to learn something in here tonight, you'll learn something. If you decide to be mad, you'll be mad. Go ahead, I don't care. That's your problem, not mine. I am not responsible for how you feel. I am responsible for what I say. I'm responsible for what I do. You're responsible for your response to it. Be responsible for your responses. I'm not responsible for it.
Okay, I want to hear what Angela has to say to this.
Well, I totally agree with Jane.
Okay.
How can I not?
Accept that.
But as someone who has spent many years teaching university students, teaching graduate students, I've learned that it makes no sense for me to simply tell my students what it is I think they ought to know. They might learn enough to write a good paper, and then they'll move on, moving in another direction. So I've come to the conclusion that teaching really is about helping people to ask the right questions, to ask the right questions, and to be able to come to the conclusion themselves that there is something really terribly wrong with the way racism has shaped the history of this planet. So I think education is about unleashing the imagination. What teachers, unfortunately, most often do is shut down the imagination and to prevent people from exploring the world in their own ways. And so I think that certainly there are many questions to be asked about race and racism, about the fact that race is a fictive concept. As Jane was pointing out, we're all members of the same human race. Race is a social construction. Race was produced by racism. But of course, this does not mean that it doesn't cause damage in the world, that it hasn't been the producer, the generator of the worst kind of violence one can imagine. But I think that what we try to do is to get people to come to that conclusion on their own. And not on their own as individuals. See, one of the reasons we have so many problems in this country and in this world, particularly during this neoliberal era, is because we have been encouraged to think of ourselves as individuals primarily, and not members of a larger community. So when we think about getting rid of racism, we think about changing individuals. It's not going to happen simply by changing individuals. The structures produce racism even when the individuals assume that they are anti-racist. How is it that we ended up with a prison system with such a vast majority of people of color? How is it that there are over 2 million people in the jails and prisons and immigrant detention facilities and jails in Indian country and military prison? How did that happen? If we don't, ask the kinds of questions that will allow us to understand how racism shapes all of the important institutional structures in this society, and that simply changing people's minds is going to solve the problem. We're right now we're watching the trial of what is his name? Jason Van Dyke in Chicago. Laquan McDonald. You remember the killing of? I think the policeman's name is
I don't know.
Jason Van Dyke. Is that right? Something like that.
My husband would know.
That's right. Okay, you checked it. You probably Googled it, huh? And no longer can we assume that simply by holding this individual police officer responsible for what was a horrendous murder, because we saw the tape, right, where he shot him. How many times? 14, 15, 16 times?
16.
16 times.
16.
And even if someone like this police officer gets sentenced to prison for life, that's not going to change the police apparatus.
Right.
That's not going to make any substantive difference. And so we also have to learn how to think in terms of changing these institutions and these repressive apparatuses. And this is why we need to see ourselves as a part of a community of struggle, a community of resistance, of people who are like-minded and who are committed to engaging in the struggle against racism and all of the related oppressions over decades and perhaps even over centuries. Because
Okay.
I don't know how long it's going to take to purge this world of racism.
Okay, so people came to hear you, and you have issued a call, both of you, that things do need to change. You're talking about systemic change and changing minds. What are 3 things that each person in this room can do as individuals, at home, work, communities, to advance the understanding of race and privilege and its role in social justice issues? What's the call for action you would issue to this group?
So who's first?
Who's first? Oh, I'm first?
Yeah.
Turn off your television. Pick up a book. Go out of your way to meet somebody you would never have wanted to meet before. Look at that person as a cousin and say, I want to know what I can do to make my life less ugly where you're concerned. And never, white people, walk up to the nearest black person and say, what's it like to be black? And never, when I come to speak to your school, or your college or your university, never say to me, I think we should ignore differences and talk about similarities. Similarities are more important than differences. And never let me hear you say, when I see people, I don't see people as black or brown or red or yellow. I just... And how about this one from a teacher? I don't care whether you're black, brown, red, yellow, or green with purple polka dots, I'm going to treat you all alike. How many of you have heard that one out of a teacher? How many of you have ever seen people who are green with purple polka dots? Well, you see, when a teacher lumps all those people in with those who are green with purple polka dots, she's saying you're all like aliens from another planet. She never says white in there. She never says white, because it's all right to see white. How many of you have had a person stand up when you were speaking and say, I just look for the person's heart? People, the next time somebody says that to you, you need to say, if you can see my heart from where you are, you should go down to the local hospital and volunteer to be their X-ray machine. You see, this whole thing is ridiculous. To treat people positively or negatively on the basis of your ignorance about skin color is ridiculous. Now here's something else you can do. Go to my website. A teacher, a real educator, quite frankly, gave me a list of commitments to combat racism. Go to my website, janeelliott.com, take that list, download it, go through it, check yes, those that you have done, check no, those that you haven't done, circle one that you check no, and do it for a month. At the end of the month, take out the paper and make notes on it as to how your life has changed as a result of doing that one thing. There are 18 things on that paper. Then, read the list of typical statements that white folks make that think they aren't racist. Check those that you would be inclined to say that you have heard. Then read the clarifications of those statements, how they are being heard by the person to whom you're saying them. If you do that, that will change your white awareness. And our problem is white lack of awareness. Make no mistake about this. People of color know about racism. They recognize it when they hear it. And when you say to a person of color, I don't see you black, you ought to have your tongue cut out first. I can't examine your heads, but people, if what you are saying is being perceived as racist, say something else. Perception is everything. If what you are saying is being perceived as racist, change your language. You can do that. If you choose to, you'd better choose to. But you better choose to. There are 18 things on that list of commitments to combat racism. I challenge you to do 3 of them in the next 3 months. It'll change people's attitude toward you and your awareness of the world.
Wow.
Yes.
Angela, call to action. What could they do concretely?
Well, you know, I am a person who has always believed in the power of unity and united struggles. So I would say find some kind of organization, whether it's a cultural organization, a political organization, figure out a way to become a part of a larger community, a community that is larger than your own individual self. But there's some things that individuals can do. And since you asked for 3, that's the first one, join an organization. The second one is, and this holds true for white people as well as for people of color. Whenever you hear a racist comment being offered, call them on it right there, wherever you are.
That's right.
Don't let it pass. And I would also like to say that it's especially important for us to recognize the differences among different communities of color and to become aware of those struggles. You know, for example, what can black people do to support the struggle to defend the immigrant rights movement? You know why? It is absolutely racist to assume that citizenship is equivalent to documents. That you can determine a person's commitment based on a piece of paper that they have or don't have. And especially now, during this period, we all have to stand up in support of undocumented immigrants. And because of the impact of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism all over the world, and because of the ways in which the whole functioning of racism has been transformed. Consider local police departments all over this country that have been trained in counterinsurgency tactics and strategies, anti-terrorist approaches, and in many instances, I have to say they're trained by the state of Israel and the Israeli army, and recognize that because of the fact that the U.S. is responsible for the continuation of the occupation of Israel, our struggle against racism here in the United States is contingent on our ability to support our Palestinian sisters and brothers. I mean, after all, Palestinian activists on the ground in Palestine were the very first to offer solidarity for those who were demonstrating at Ferguson. They were the very first. Okay, one other point. I know I'm because I have to urge us to think about the way in which racism gets reproduced through sexism and misogyny, and vice versa. So if it's true that you should never allow a racist statement to go unanswered, wherever you are, it is also the case, and I'm saying this especially to the men in the audience, that and particularly when you are in all male circles and someone makes an off the wall remark about women, you have to stand up and say no. You have to say, no longer will this be permitted. And so I think that if we get a sense that we're all in this together, we're all in this together, and women have to recognize that this is our time. Black women are in the leadership of movements all over the world. And I'm thinking about someone like Marielle Franco, who was assassinated in Brazil because of her work. And you know, we say that when women rise up, when Black women finally stand up, the whole world stands with them.
Okay, so I'm going to, if you have questions, start getting them ready in your head. We're not going to have much time, so you're going to have a limited time in the mic. I want to just make a comment on what you said about Israel, because a friend of mine who's Jewish says to me that one of the distressing things that she encounters is people who confuse Jewishness as a religion with Israel as a political state. So I just wanted to make sure that you're talking about a political state. You're not generalizing to a religion. Correct.
No, why would I?
Okay, I just wanted.
Why would I?
I get it.
I mean, there are large numbers of Jewish people who are involved in the campaign against the occupation of Palestine.
Good.
You know, as a matter of fact, I mean, I work with an organization that is called Jewish Voice for Peace, and they're in the forefront of encouraging an understanding of the relationship between anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Latinx racism, etc.
Good. I just wanted to make sure because
But
there are
it's
some people
it's
who.
sad that we have to say that,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes, it really
It's very
is.
sad that
It's
we have
sad.
to say. And that shows you the way ideology functions.
Right. Okay, questions? Okay, okay, go, start. Rena, go for it. Is the mic working? The mic is not working?
Here, do you want to use mine?
Okay. Where's Connie? Okay, I'll share. We can share this.
Is this one? Okay. Jeez. So on behalf of the Graduate College of Social Work and the University of Houston, we wanted to thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with us. So we have a huge live streaming audience that is tuning in and capturing every awesome second of this. So we wanted to start the Q&A with a question from our social media audience. So the question that we've received the most is, and this is open to both of you for response, what has Colin Kaepernick's Take a Knee protest taught us about race and privilege?
Oh, I sure do. Thank you very much for that. The Star Spangled Banner is one of the most racist songs ever written. Number one. Number two, the last line of the Star Spangled Banner says, "O say shall that Star Spangled Banner yet wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." Now make no mistake about this. On this stage, because of the situation in this country, I represent the land of the free. And so do the people in the stands at those football games. Those black players on the field represent the home of the brave. And she represents the home of the brave. I can say the things I say, and I've been saying them for 50 years because I'm white and I can get away with it. And I've been threatened with death, and they had to take me out of Uniontown, Pennsylvania at midnight because the teachers called the superintendent and said, "If you don't get that bitch out of town, we're going to shoot her." So they got me out of town because they didn't want me shot in Uniontown. They didn't care if I was shot in Harrisburg, but they didn't want me shot in Uniontown. People, we live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. 3 months ago, I was at the University of Indiana, and they said, "We think we should forget about differences and talk about similarities." So I had a tall white male stand on my left and a tall black female stand on my right on the stage. And I said, "Now, do you folks see any differences here?" And of course, the first thing they said was height. And I thought, "You fools, you just failed the test." I knew what they would say because I've done it so often. So I said to this tall white male, "Is your height important to you?" He said, "Well," I said, "Yeah, blah, blah. Did you earn it? No. Is it a physical characteristic over which you have no control? Yes. Does it give you power? Yes." Asked the black female the same thing. She said, "Well, but there are other issues to deal with." I said, "We're going to deal with them." So then we dealt with sex. They said sex. I asked this white man if sex was important to him. I turned him into a man of color immediately. He turned brick red. So then I had to stop and say, "Is the fact that you're male important to you?" "Yes." "Does it give you power?" "Yes." So he has power as a white male. He has power, a tall male. So then they said age. And then finally somebody said color. And I said, thank you very much. In 50 years of asking these questions, you are the first group in which somebody has said color. Now, are you talking about skin color or hair color? This woman said skin color. So I said to this tall white male, is your skin color important to you? And this is an administrator in a college, in a university. He said, I never have to think about it. Think about that. I never have to think about it. I was just furious. And I said, did you earn it? No. Is it a physical characteristic over which you have no control? Yes. Does your skin color give you power? Yes. I said, are you pretty free to do and say and be and go wherever you choose as long as you stay within the confines of the law? He said, yes, I'm free and I'm not afraid of anything. I turned to this tall, black, beautiful woman and I said to her, he's a totally free man. Sometimes does it take courage for you to get out of bed in the morning? And she paused for a long moment, and then she said, I'm going to say something I've never said in public, out loud before, because I've been ashamed to. I said, and that is, she said, I have 2 children. They're both daughters. Both times when I was pregnant, I prayed that I wouldn't have a son, because I didn't want to think of what he'd have to go through, and I didn't want to think about what I'd have to go through when I lost him. I looked up at that black woman, and there was one tear slowly coursing its way down that left cheek of that beautiful black woman. This tall white man beside me was going, and I thought ugly things. I said to that group, what the hell have we done? How long will you continue to educate in ways that make this woman hope she doesn't have sons because of what this society might do to them? I'll never forget that moment. That was probably, if we had had a tape of that, we could change the world. White women, you don't want to be thought of the way we were thinking of you at that moment. White women want to have sons to carry on the family name. We live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. The white man on that stage was in the land of the free. That black woman was in the home of the brave. People, you need to realize that. I know there are some brave white men, but they choose to be or not to be brave. Black women have no choice. They have to be brave every day.
I really love Colin Kaepernick. He's quite remarkable. And I think that when one looks at what is happening within culture, music, and sports, one gets a sense of the changes that can potentially happen in the larger society. When football players begin to speak out against racism, that means that the world has got to change. And let me just say this, because Trump, he's a very confusing person, and he confuses everything. And his assumption is that kneeling when the Star-Spangled Banner is played, and I agree with you, it's a militarist, racist anthem. We should have had Lift Every Voice and Sing as the national anthem. That would have been, but Colin did not want to give the impression that he was speaking out against the country, but rather that he was protesting the racist violence of police departments and the fact that young black people were being killed. And at first he sat, and this veteran told him, well, that's really not cool to just sit, because it seems like you're being unpatriotic. And there's a way to be patriotic. As a matter of fact, for many years we talked about people in struggle as the other America. Mm-hmm. The America to which we dedicate our energy and resources for change. But anyway, this veteran said, well, when we want to pay tribute to people who have fallen, we kneel. And so that was the origin of the gesture, to pay tribute to those who have fallen. And it is also related to kneel-ins, which happened during the civil rights era, where there would be kneel-ins against segregation. So I am so happy that Colin Kaepernick continued to speak out, and people like Michael Bennett. I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Bennett, who just recently got traded by the Seahawks. He's in Philadelphia. Where is he? Philly. Football fan. So he's in Philadelphia, right? Well, Michael Bennett has written an amazing book called Things That Make White People Uncomfortable. So I would suggest that you look at that. But when sports and culture begin to reveal the signs of resistance, that means that something is really going on in this country.
Okay, where is Connie? Would somebody get, Allie, would you find Connie? Okay, next question.
Yes, hi. My name is Sam Oser. I'm a local independent journalist in Houston. Houston came close to having a democratic system replaced, completely removed and replaced with appointed managers. There are 2 bills in Texas that are pro-charter, pro-privatization of public schools. Thank you. And they almost removed a democratic system here in Houston. Activists, including Black Lives Matter, Houston Rising, Houston Democratic Socialists, they urged Houston elected officials and board trustees to sue the Texas Education Agency, who is pro-charter, and they haven't. What is your take on this? What words of advice would you give to elected officials who are in this room, mind you? And what words of advice would you give to people in this room to fight neoliberal systems that are in Houston?
Would you repeat the question and then respond? Would you repeat the question and respond?
Okay, all right. There are some elected officials in the House, I understand.
Yes.
And you know, let me say that electoral politics are problematic. I mean, our two-party system is really messed up because it shuts out so many people and so many ideas. But let me set that aside and point out the importance of local politics, especially at a time when we are witnessing the effort to turn the country back to the period when, you know, white was really right. It's a make America great again, make America white again. You know, that's what it's all about. And as you were pointing out, privatization is a major threat. It's the production of global capitalism, privatization of education, privatization of punishment. As a matter of fact, what's interesting is that before Trump was elected, Obama had, and you know, I have a lot of critiques of Obama as well, but don't we wish we had him now? But Obama had announced the intent to end all federal contracts with private prisons. And as a matter of fact, their stocks were beginning to decline. All of the private prison companies, Corrections Corporation of America, Core Civic, GEO, And because prison privatization considers the most profitable dimension to be the incarceration of undocumented immigrants, and Trump announced the intent, well, we don't even have to talk about the way in which he used the issue of undocumented immigrants to ideologically confuse the electorate, and that's basically why he was elected. So I think that it's the responsibility of local officials to speak out against that, and to recognize that there is no future for this planet if we assent to the kind of privatization that has run amok. It's a juggernaut of privatization all over the world. It's about increasing the wealth of the planet in ever decreasing numbers of hands. And if local public officials can't stand up against that, then we have to
Out of office.
we have to replace them, but also, I think, more importantly, we have to create the kind of movements outside of the electoral arena that will force elected officials to understand where it is we need to be going in the world.
How many of you didn't? How many of you are old enough to vote in the last election? How many of you didn't vote in the last election? If you want to change the local officials, you go to the local official and say, I have this many people who are going to vote you out of office. Now, what do you want to do? You can we give you 6 weeks to change your behaviors. And if you haven't changed your behaviors in 6 weeks, we as a group are going to vote you out of office. That means people, they did it with the union movement, and President Reagan destroyed the union movement. You need to get together and go to these people and say, here are the things that are wrong. Write them or go. Are you afraid of them? Yes, you are, and you should be, because they can vote you out of life. And you know it, and so do I. Join groups that are determined to change the situation. Don't tell me that one person can't make a difference. That woman is only one person, and she has made a difference all over the world. And I'm an angry old white woman, and I'm sick of this. And if you want to make a difference, go to the polls and take people with you. Do it.
Okay.
That's why we have votes.
We are over time. I've just gotten instructions, 2 more questions. I'm so sorry to the rest of you who are in line. There will be 2 more questions. If anybody has to leave, feel free to get up now.
If you leave, we'll take your name.
2 more questions.
Go ahead.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, sir.
So before I ask my question, I definitely want to shout out 2 student groups on campus that are definitely trying to make a difference for undocumented students. If you're trying to ally for undocumented immigrants, there's the Youth Empowerment Alliance at UH. Find them on Facebook. And then there's also the Students for Justice in Palestine here at UH. So definitely like them on Facebook and go to their events.
Okay, you could go a little slower and speak up a little bit.
Yeah, I'll just go on my question because I don't want to take too much time. But I have a question about erasure and forgetting. I've been seeing it 2 times. So one on the news with John McCain, I respect life, but I don't respect lies. So, and then I've seen it a second time here in one of my own social work classes where I'm showing a film about the history of nonprofits, but they don't include anything about the Black Panthers, right? So I'm wondering, what do you have to talk about when it comes to keeping narratives as pure as possible and reminding so we don't forget these things?
Keeping narratives as pure as possible?
Well, I'm not sure whether we need to keep the narratives pure, but I do think that we have to try to play a role in reversing this historical amnesia. And you're absolutely right. It was the Black Panther Party that originally came up with the idea of serving breakfast to children who were unable to learn, hungry. And of course, it's interesting now that there are official governmental free breakfast programs run by the Department of Agriculture, but the Department of Agriculture never refers that program to the Black Panther Party. And I think that we create counter narratives. And we're never certain whether those counter-narratives are actually going to become hegemonic, to use a term that some of you who are academics are familiar with. We're never absolutely certain. But if we don't do that work, they will be lost forever. And the fact that finally now Rosa Parks is recognized not as a tired old woman, and she pointed out that she wasn't even old when she refused to, and she definitely wasn't tired, but that she was an organizer, she was a leader, she had done work, she had done anti-rape investigations. She had done investigations of white supremacist groups for gang raping black women in Alabama before she refused to move to the back of the bus. And so now we're recognizing this, but that would have been lost forever, her role as an organizer, if we hadn't continued to develop I guess there's some academics in the audience, right?
Yes.
Are there what Foucault calls subjugated knowledge, right? And we do it. Graduate students can do it by changing your citational practices. You assume that in order to footnote something, it has to have already made its way into academic discourse. But as a matter of fact, many of these ideas have other origins. Knowledge, this isn't the only venue for the production of knowledge. Knowledge is produced in movements. It's produced in the trade union movement. It's produced in prisons. And I've tried to teach my graduate students to develop more imaginative ways of citing and recognizing that something that happened at an activist conference can be cited as a legitimate form of the production of knowledge. And I'll just, I'll say finally, I do a lot of work in prison studies. We haven't really had the opportunity to talk a great deal about prisons this evening. But ever since I was arrested actually I was already doing prison work when I was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list and ended up going to prison myself. But we have an academic field that is now called critical prison studies. It's interdisciplinary. It involves the social sciences. It involves the humanities. It involves the arts. And this field, which can now claim many, many scholars who are doing work in it, came about as a result of the work of prison intellectuals, of people in prison who were trying to understand the working of that apparatus. So I think that your question is really, really important. Keep looking for ways to make sure the subjugated knowledge isn't completely eradicated.
Last question, friends. The rest of you are in line. I'm so sorry.
Good evening. My name is July McSham. I'm a professor here in Houston. I used to be across the street at Texas Southern. Now I'm down in Pasadena. I got a lot of students in here tonight.
So where are you now?
At San Jacinto College. It's a top 10 junior college in the nation. And we're being reviewed as the #1 in the nation. So y'all support San Jac. So it's an honor to stand here to represent such a renowned institution. But I'm not just standing here representing San Jacinto or Texas Southern, which I am an alumnus and a former professor.
We're on short on time.
I know. I'm here, I'm representing all of that as a black woman from the South, because that's what people see first. They see my color. And as a political science professor, I'm charged with bringing what's happening in the world into the classroom every day, and there's plenty going on. With Labor Day having been Monday, I wanted the students to discuss labor issues. So with it being the 50th anniversary of the sanitation strike in Memphis, I shared that photo and I asked them, tell me what you see. And they had the long guns and they had the tanks and all of that. And I was like, we had discussed last week the militarization responses that have been going on with Ferguson. And so I let them know that that was nothing new. But for some odd reason that I just can't understand, and maybe you can give me some tools to eradicate this, the students still found excuses for the militarization. They still found some excuse. These men had picket signs, that's it, and they still found an excuse. When I showed them the new Nike commercial, they still found excuses. They said, well, it's disrespect. Is disrespect worth a hole in the top of Michael Brown's head? So please equip me with some tools that I can share with my students to get them out of that foolishness of saying, oh, it's disrespectful to a flag. Because I've gone over the lyrics to the Star Spangled Banner with them. So just help me, please.
Okay. Jane, do you understand the question?
It's time not only to change the narrative, but start telling the truth. It's time for kids to know, all kids of all kinds, and grown-ups to know, all kinds, that black history didn't start with slavery. If you haven't introduced your students to Anthony Browder's Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, you haven't done your students a fair job. If you haven't introduced your students to the book Stop Falling for the Okie Doke, you haven't done your students a fair job. It's time for these kids to hear from Robert Wald Sussman's book, which is The Myth of Race, that this whole thing is a myth, and it's time to stop believing the myth, and it's time to stop teaching the myth, and it's time to realize that blacks were doing cataract surgery with metal instruments before there were hospitals in Europe. It's time to realize that blacks were intelligent, creative, adventurous, curious, brilliant people before you white folks evolved. It's time to start teaching the truth. If we don't start teaching the truth pretty soon, people, we're in really big trouble. It's time to start teaching the truth. Now, white people aren't going to be happy with those truths. But eventually they'll be better off. Eventually they will realize that they have been myth-read for the last 400 years. It's time to give up the myth. It's time to tell the truth in history. People, what were the names of Columbus's 3 ships? People, Vine Deloria says he left the old country with 4 ships, but 1 fell off the edge. Now, it makes as much sense to tell that as it does to tell that Columbus discovered America. People, you can't discover a place where people are already living. They discovered it before you got there. It's time to demythologize the schools and history. We are not teaching history, we're teaching hysteria. It's time to start teaching the truth. You could make a huge difference just by doing that for one day at a time. Just one day at a time. If you tell your kids it's something they have never heard before, and they go home and tell it to their parents, especially, as mine did, and one of the parents was the head of the school board, it changes the way that system operates. Because that parent has to start thinking in new ways in order to get along with that kid. You want to make home uncomfortable, people, by telling the truth. We need some discomfort.
All right. Well, you all have been a phenomenal audience. Our speakers have informed us, delighted us, thrilled us, and educated us. And so thanks to all of you for being here and for this evening.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very, very, very much.
Now that is quite an interactive engagement that I think if you listen to it to its completion about racism and white privilege. Jane Elliott, an American educator, became widely known for her blue eye, brown eye experiment, which she first conducted in 1968 in response to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Her work has been significant in addressing and challenging the concept of white privilege through direct experiment and learning. Through her provocative teaching methods, Jane had not only highlighted the existence of white privilege, but has also actively worked towards its deconstruction by fostering empathy, promoting active listening, and encouraging social introspection. I think I'm not going to speak much about this topic because what we have been taught in that video is quite huge, and it needs a lot of time to really consume and internalize. So tell me down in the comment section what you take out of it. And if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.